Welcome along on a beautiful Wellington day. It's always like this, of course. We're here on the waterfront and with Taupo farmer, Mike Barton. Welcome along, Mike.
Morning, Chair.
So we're here to talk to Mike about some of the issues that were facing Lake Taupo a few years ago. And could you run us through the challenges that the lake was facing, Mike?
Sure. We probably have to go back to the year 2000, Jeff.
Yeah.
When science was telling us that there were increases in nitrogen and chlorophyll A in the lake itself.
So that's algae.
Algae,
Yeah.
chlorophyll A is an indicator of algae, and nitrogen is a nutrient that is necessary for that growth. Taupo is what they call a nitrogen sensitive water body, in that there's already a truckload of phosphorus in it from its volcanic origins, not man-induced. It's like a garden. If you then add the one limiting nutrient to a vegetable garden, you get massive growth. So it turned out, we didn't want to hear it as farmers originally, it turned out that the bulk of that nitrogen was coming from farming. We had hoped that it would be near-shore batches and septic tanks and all those sorts of things. You know, do you always want the problem to be someone else's?
Absolutely.
But it wasn't. You've got to bear in mind, though, that most of the farmers in the catchment were encouraged to go there by either Lands and Surveys or Māori Affairs, and so most of them had only been settled 10, 15 years before by the government, and every stream and every river in the catchment had been fenced off and riparian planted. So we thought we'd done the right thing, but it turned out that nitrogen and free draining soils are a pretty volatile combination.
As we're finding in Canterbury now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So riparian planting certainly fixes your phosphorus and fecal coliform issues, but nitrogen flows vertically down through the soil, and in our case it takes 80 years.
Right.
But it eventually ends up in the groundwater that flows into the lake.
So in 2000 you were sort of looking at this big wave of nitrogen heading towards the lake, if you like.
Yeah, a big wave might be an overstatement, but
Nice.
there was a wave of nitrogen, and we were confronted with that. And over a period of 12 years, we negotiated with scientists, farmers. We actually funded or got funding for a fair bit of research, because we actually wanted to know what was happening in our catchment. We didn't want modelled impacts from other catchments. It needed to apply to us and our climate and our soils before we would accept it. We did all that, and in the end it was inevitable that we were contributing about 90% of what was called the manageable nitrogen. Like, you can't control nitrogen going into a water body from rainfall or from native forests. That's your pre-human levels, really.
Yeah.
So the manageable stuff is what comes from human activity, and the bulk of that came from farms. You have to bear in mind too that it wasn't a fertiliser issue. I don't put any nitrogen fertiliser on my farm, but I fixed nitrogen into our system from clover. The problem was, in fact, urine. There's high levels of nitrogen in stock urine, higher than plants can take up. And in the winter, when you've got cold weather, no plant growth and rainfall, you get drainage below the root zone, and at that point the nitrogen begins its 80-year journey and eventually gets to the lake. So
if you're looking at limiting nitrogen, ultimately you're looking at limiting the number of cows.
Correct, exactly. There's a
What about sheep?
Yeah, sheep. Every form of animal, every form of livestock contributes. I mean, there's a hierarchy of pollution, if you like, and sheep are the least polluting in terms of nitrogen per stock unit. Then there's deer, then beef cattle, and then finally dairy cattle are the most leaky, if you want, of the animals. But we had to confront the fact that we were going to be capped in perpetuity. My farm system is capped at my 2004 livestock levels. I can't increase. We've had a lot of science on our farm, and Land Care Research, for example, has a permanent laboratory on the farm, looking at ways of increasing our output without increasing our nitrogen leaching, and there really isn't anything on the table at the moment.
So you got scientists snooping around your farm all the time?
I run...
Is that why you dress so well?
Well, that could be. I jokingly say that our stocking rate of scientists per hectare is probably the the best in the country. We probably have 6 to 10 universities a year from around the world come and spend time with us, because this is an issue for everyone. It's not just a New Zealand or a Taupo issue. The production of food to feed a growing population has an impact on the environment. And in our case it was nitrogen, and some other catchments it's going to be phosphorus or fecal coliforms or sediment. But the link between food production and impact on the environment is still not well understood by either farmers or by consumers. So we developed this what's called a cap and trade model in Taupo. It was finally gazetted as legislation in 2012. So we've had 2.5, nearly 3 years where the legislation has been operating. We're audited according to that legislation. I would say that of the 105 farmers that started in this process, there's now only 75. The rest have either been bought out and shut down or as part of this whole process, because we did have to reduce the amount of nitrogen coming from farming, and the only way we could do that was to actually shut some farms down, which...
By how much did you have to reduce the amount
We had
of
to
nitrogen
reduce the nitrogen by 20% from farming sources, which, if you're a numbers man, that comes to 170 tonnes of nitrogen per annum. Even though the nitrate levels in the lake were starting to increase, the lake is still one of the 4 cleanest lakes in the world.
It's beautiful.
And
beautiful
it's the only lake that is that clean with any form of economic activity going on around it. Other lakes that are as clean are in catchments where there's no human activity. So I think we've nailed it, and we've learnt to balance those things. But it is a really clean lake. I mean, you could dip a glass in the lake and drink it, and the nitrate levels in it would be 150 times less than the World Health Organization minimum standards.
Yeah.
So I feel really good about the fact that we've actually cracked the water quality issue. Ask me in 10 years whether we've cracked the farming profitability issue under this.
So really, in many ways, the action you guys took on Lake Taupo was for the future, not to prevent a crisis now, but to prevent something that would slowly build over the next 80 years.
Exactly, you've put that really well. I mean, if for example unbridled conversion to dairying had allowed to continue, then we would have accelerated the degradation of the lake. What we've done is our best guess, using current science, our best guess at providing a mechanism for protecting the lake. But I won't live to see the results because of that 80-year lag.
Yeah.
What we're doing now on our farms will only be evident in about 2090. So I'm unlikely to be around by then. So it is.
How does it feel then? How does it feel to be doing something now that ultimately you're not going to be around to see the benefits of?
Feels bloody good. No, it does. I mean, this is a multi-generation process. I mean, some of the stuff we've done as the Lake Taupo Protection Trust, we've put covenants on the land that's been converted back into trees. We've put covenants on that land for 999 years. So that's the scale of this project. And 999 years is as long as you can put a covenant on land in New Zealand. We would have made it in perpetuity if we'd been able to. But so yeah, you have to look at this thing with incredibly long time horizons. And some catchments where the waterways are significantly degraded, they've taken 150 years to get to that point. It may take 50 to 100 years to get them back to the level we want. So you can't look at this thing from a point of view of a 3-year election cycle or a very short-term perspective. You have to have a long-term lens if you're going to make it work.
Great. So you better get back to Taupo and get back into your swan dry and gumboots, eh?
Yeah. It's getting a bit cooler, so it's just about swan dry time back in Taupo. But yeah. No, I'm quite happy to bridge both worlds.
Thanks, Mike Barton.